One day an early hominin crouches at the edge of a waterhole to drink. Head lowered, eyes on the surface, and something looks back up out of the dark water. A face, moving exactly when they move, staring exactly where they stare, in territory they were sure was empty a second ago. The reaction is instant, and it is not calm. This is not, that is me. For a mind that has never had a reason to expect this, the first read is, that is someone else. A stranger, crouched at the same water, at the exact same distance, matching every movement. A hand rises defensively. So does the stranger's. A low growl, a threat display, maybe a stone thrown straight into the water to drive the intruder off, and the intruder vanishes, instantly, the moment the surface breaks. Which, if anything, makes it worse. Whatever was watching didn't run away. It simply disappeared. This hominin has just done something almost no animal on Earth can do. Or rather, is right at the edge of doing it, and has absolutely no idea. What just happened at that waterhole is one of the rarest cognitive events in the animal kingdom, and scientists have spent the last 50 years figuring out exactly how rare, how old, and how it actually gets resolved. It would be easy to assume this is a story about the invention of mirrors, a neat little history of polished stone and glass, a few thousand years old, done. That's not even close to the real story. A mirror doesn't create the ability to recognize your own face. It only reveals whether that ability already exists inside the brain looking into it. The real, much stranger question researchers have spent decades chasing isn't, when did humans invent mirrors? It's, when did any hominin, at any point in evolutionary history, develop a brain capable of understanding that the face in the reflection is their own, a capability that, as far as the evidence shows, arrived millions of years before there was anything to reflect themselves in. That question turned out to be answerable, not through fossils, but through a deceptively simple experiment involving a dab of paint and a sleeping chimpanzee. In 1970, psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. designed a test that's still considered the gold standard for measuring self-awareness in animals, more than 50 years later. It's called the Mirror Self-Recognition Test, or the mark test, and the logic behind it is almost embarrassingly simple. An animal is anesthetized and a small, odorless mark, a dot of dye, is placed somewhere on its body it cannot normally see, like its forehead or ear. When the animal wakes up and is shown a mirror, researchers watch closely for one specific behavior. Does the animal reach up and touch the mark on its own body, using the mirror to guide its hand? Or does it react to the mirror as though it's looking at another animal entirely, inspecting the glass, looking behind it, showing aggression or fear toward what it assumes is a stranger? Gallup ran this test on chimpanzees first, and the results were striking but not immediate. Before any chimpanzee touched its own mark, researchers recorded a first phase that looked exactly like the scene at that waterhole. Threat displays, vocalizations, aggressive lunges at the glass, the same behavior a chimp would show toward an unfamiliar rival invading its space. Only after repeated exposure did that hostility fade into investigation, and only then into recognition. Since then, the same test has been run across dozens of species. The list of animals that reliably pass it is remarkably short: chimpanzees, orangutans, bonobos, one population of gorillas, Asian elephants, bottlenose dolphins, orcas, and more recently and controversially, Eurasian magpies, one of the only birds to ever pass. Dogs fail it, cats fail it. Most monkeys, despite being close relatives of the great apes, never move past that first, stranger, stage at all. They can spend years next to a mirror and still react to it with the same alarm, every single time. Human children, tested the same way with a dot of makeup placed on the forehead, don't reliably pass until somewhere between 18 and 24 months of age, meaning even within our own species, this ability isn't present at birth. It has to develop. Go back to the waterhole one more time. The hominin has just watched the stranger vanish into broken water. Say, this time, it doesn't take generations. Say it happens fast, within a handful of visits, and one day, staring down, a hand rises to touch its own cheek at the exact moment the reflection's hand rises too. Recognition lands. That single moment, if it happened the way researchers now believe it could have, wasn't just figuring out a puzzle, it was proof of something researchers call a theory of self, the ability to hold a mental model of your own body and identity as a thing that exists separately from you, a thing other things can be compared against. It's a strange trick for a brain to pull off. It's also, researchers argue, tangled up with empathy, with deception, with planning for a future version of yourself, because understanding I am a self, separate from others, is the same mental machinery you need to understand that everyone else is a self too, with their own separate mind, their own separate wants. Here's the part that turns this from one hominin's private moment into a species-wide fact. Chimpanzees pass this same test today, using the same recognition, and chimpanzees share a common ancestor with us. It means whatever clicked at that waterhole wasn't invented there. It was already sitting in the brain, inherited from a shared ancestor 6 to 7 million years earlier. The hominin at the water didn't discover the ability. It just finally had a reason to use it, which means for millions of years before that single moment, every ancestor before this one carried a brain fully capable of the same recognition, and never once got the chance to prove it, because they never crouched at the right still water, at the right angle, at the right moment of quiet. So the fear at the start of this story wasn't a flaw. It was the correct response of a mind encountering something completely unprecedented for the very first time. And the recognition that followed wasn't luck either. It was a genuinely ancient capability finally getting used for what it could always do. But not every encounter would have gone this cleanly. Recognition doesn't arrive instantly, and it doesn't arrive for everyone. This same arc, fear, then confusion, then recognition, almost certainly played out differently every time, for some individuals, in a handful of visits, like the version above. For others, it may never have resolved at all, the same way some animals in Gallup's tests never move past the stranger stage no matter how many times they're shown the mirror. We'll never recover which version happened to which individual, or how many times it happened at all, anywhere across our evolutionary past. It left no bone, no tool, no burial. Water doesn't fossilize a reaction. But given how old self-recognition appears to be as a cognitive trait, and given that early humans and their ancestors spent enormous amounts of time near rivers, lakes, and waterholes out of basic survival necessity, most researchers consider it likely, though impossible to prove, that some version of this scene played out many times, independently, across hundreds of thousands of years, and was simply forgotten each time, because a reflection in a wind-blown pond isn't something you can carry with you, or show to anyone else afterward. The real turning point isn't when a human first saw their reflection, or first felt afraid of it, or even first recognized it. It's when a human first figured out how to make that reflection permanent and portable, something you could return to on purpose, instead of stumbling into by accident. That answer has an actual date attached to it, and it comes from central Turkey. At Catalhook, one of the earliest known large settlements in human history, archaeologists recovered small, carefully shaped discs of polished obsidian, a naturally black volcanic glass, dating back to roughly 6000 BC. A related find at a nearby site called Kenhasan has been dated even earlier, to around 6500 BC. These are, as far as the archaeological record currently shows, the oldest known manufactured mirrors on Earth. They weren't accidental. Researchers who have studied the manufacturing process have identified multiple distinct stages of production, selecting the right piece of obsidian, grinding it flat against coarser stone, then progressively polishing it with finer and finer materials, and finally buffing the surface with animal fat and soft cloth until it held a genuinely sharp, if dark and slightly convex, reflection. 56 of these mirrors have now been catalogued across 6 different Anatolian sites, meaning this wasn't a one-off invention by a single curious person. It was a known, transmitted craft made by people who understood exactly what they were trying to create. And critically, these objects weren't scattered casually through ordinary households. Most were recovered from burial contexts, buried alongside individuals who appeared to have held higher status within their community. From the very first mirror ever deliberately made, this object was already something rare, valuable, and tied to identity and status. Not a practical tool available to everyone, but a controlled, precious thing. It's worth pausing on what these first mirrors actually looked like to use, because it's very different from the waterhole, and very different from the mirror on your wall today. Obsidian is dark, almost black, and even highly polished. It never gives a perfectly clean reflection the way modern glass does. What you'd see looking into a cattlehook mirror wasn't a crisp copy of your face. It was a dim, slightly distorted, almost shadowy version of yourself, staring back out of what genuinely looks like a small pool of solid darkness. That visual quality didn't go unnoticed by the people who made and used them. Historians studying obsidian mirrors across multiple ancient cultures have repeatedly found them associated not just with personal grooming, but with ritual and divination, a tradition that continues, remarkably, for thousands of years afterward in the form of so-called black mirrors, used in various divination practices well into more recent history. The first mirror a human being ever deliberately crafted wasn't just a tool for seeing yourself clearly. For many of the people who owned one, it seems to have doubled as something closer to a window into the uncanny, an object that showed you yourself, but not quite clearly enough to feel entirely ordinary. In a strange way, it hadn't fully solved the waterhole problem. It had just made the same dim, unsettling reflection something you could own. The obsidian mirror wasn't replaced quickly. For nearly 2,000 years after Cattlehook, it remained one of the only ways to reliably see your own reflection. Polished copper and bronze mirrors began appearing in Mesopotamia and Egypt around 4000 to 3000 BC, offering a brighter, more neutral-toned reflection than dark volcanic glass, though still nowhere near the clarity we take for granted today. Glass mirrors as we'd recognize them took thousands of years longer to arrive, and even then, early versions were dim and imperfect, thin metal backing applied to glass, prone to clouding and distortion. It wasn't until 1835, when German chemist Justus von Liebig developed a reliable chemical process for depositing a thin, even layer of silver onto glass, that mirrors finally became bright, clear, and cheap enough to be an everyday object rather than a precious one. That's less than 200 years ago. For every generation of humans before that, the overwhelming majority of everyone who has ever lived, a genuinely sharp reflection of their own face was either something they never saw at all, or something reserved for the wealthy few who could own one. Here's the strange part nobody tells you about that waterhole moment. Recognizing your own face for the first time isn't actually about vanity, or grooming, or checking how you look. It's about something closer to the birth of loneliness, and the birth of connection, in the same instant. To recognize, that is me, is to understand for the first time that you are a single, separate thing in the world, not fully merged with your tribe, not one blurred mass of bodies around a fire, but one specific self, with edges, that ends where everyone else begins. Every animal that has ever passed that test crossed the same line. The moment you can see yourself as separate is the same moment you become capable of truly understanding that others are separate too, which is, as far as researchers can tell, where empathy actually starts. Not in the ability to recognize a face, in the ability to recognize a face as other. So that hominin at the waterhole, mid-threat display, terrified of a stranger who turned out to be no one, didn't just learn what its own face looked like that day. It took one step toward understanding that everyone else around that fire that night had a face, and a mind, and a fear of strangers, exactly like its own. The mirror didn't just show a face back. It was the first tool that ever taught a human being that other people are real in the same way you are.